Welcome to Make Art, a hands-on course for engineering design, a course taught at the University of South Florida. In this video, we'll look at some of the menus and features within Maya that can help us organize, control, and display our objects within Maya. So let's just go to Create, Polyprimitive, and I'll just create a cube. So we already know that when we select the cube, it turns green, indicating that it's selected and in object mode. We can see over to the right side, we have the cube, which is pcube1, that's its name, with its attributes. We could just click right where it says pcube1 and rename it my cube. But if we have multiple objects in the scene, we want to be able to maybe group them together if we want to move them or scale them or rotate them together. And we may also want to just see what objects we have in the scene. So in order to do that, we can use two different menus or two different features. We can go to Window, we can go up to Windows and down to HyperGraph Hierarchy. That will open Maya's hierarchy. Now Maya is a node-based system. That means that for each object you create, no matter what the object is, it could be a 3D mesh, it could be a shader that you create, it could be a joint tool or an animation tool, even a keyframe is considered an object. Those objects are stored in what is called a node. So anything you create will show up in the HyperGraph hierarchy as a node. So here's pcube1, or my cube, as we renamed it. So we can see if I select it in the hierarchy, it selects it in the viewport, and it turns yellow. It also shows me the attribute editor and channel box over to the right side. So that's pcube. That is the node. So the good thing about displaying our nodes in this fashion is if we want to group things together or build a hierarchy of parent and child relationship, we can do that here. So let me just go to Create, Polyprimitive, and I'll create a sphere. My sphere was created at 0, 0 location, so it's right on top of the cube. So all I have to do is hit W, and I can move my sphere over. Now I can see I have a cube and a sphere. Here in my hierarchy, I can see cube and sphere, so I can select them here, I can select them here. I can hold Shift to make double selections or to deselect. So I just click to select, hold Shift and click to select multiple. I can do the same thing in the hierarchy. I can even click and drag to make multiple selection, or click and drag in the viewport to make multiple selections. So let's say that I want to move my cube, and when I move my cube, I want the sphere to go along with it. In order to do that, very simple, I can middle mouse button in the hierarchy, middle mouse button, drag the cube, drag the sphere right on top of the cube. When I release the middle mouse button, you can see it created a hierarchical relationship where the cube now is the parent and the sphere is the child. So if I select the cube and I move just the cube, the sphere moves with it. You can see that the cube's translate x is -3. If I select the sphere, its translate is 1.5. That's because I moved it when it was originally at 0. Remember, when it was on top of the cube. So now that I put it back, you see it jumped right back on top of the cube. So let me do Control Z to undo that. So you can just see now that, again, even if I rotate the cube, the sphere rotates with it. You can see there's a rotation on my cube. There is no rotation on the sphere. I can still rotate the sphere independently, but if I move or rotate or even scale the cube, it will scale the sphere with it, even though it is not keeping that data on the actual sphere itself, because that data is kept on the parent. So I'm going to hit Control Z so we can get back to our default. And if I want to unparent this relationship, all I have to do is middle mouse button, drag the sphere out from the cube, and now it's back to itself. You just have to be careful that if you do this and you've had your sphere moved and rotated, and then you take the sphere out, the sphere is going to inherit all of those positions and movements from it. So when it is grouped, it will keep the positions and rotates clean, but as soon as you remove that group, it has to transfer that data to the actual sphere itself. So let me undo again to get back. So we can see that that is the hierarchical relationship there. Another area where you can see this relationship, or you can create this relationship, is if you select the child first, and then hold Shift and select the parent. So child, then the parent, and you can hit P, the letter P on your keyboard. When you do the child and the parent, and you hit the letter P on your keyboard, it will automatically make that hierarchical relationship where the cube is now the parent of the sphere. So again, wherever the cube moves, the sphere moves with it. That was just doing select the sphere, hold Shift, click the cube, and P for parenting. Okay, so another area where we can see this node-based structure, or the objects that we have within our scene, is we can go up to Window, Outliner. The outliner will bring up a window that looks like this. So we can see that we have a perspective camera, we have a front, a top, a side camera. Those are all by default. We have default object set and a default light set. So those stay within your outliner and in your HyperGraph hierarchy. But we can see that we have the cube and the sphere. So this is another way of viewing what's in your scene and selecting what's in your scene. Again, we can just select the sphere, middle mouse button, drag it right on top of the cube, and now you see you have a little plus sign there, and you can see that the relationship is made where the cube is the parent and the sphere is the child. So some people prefer to use the outliner, some people prefer to use the hypergraph. It does the same exact thing, it just shows you kind of in a little bit different layout what you have in your scene. Another thing to look at is grouping. We've already done parenting, where a parent will control a child or move a child along with it. Grouping is a little bit different. Grouping means that you're selecting multiple objects and you're placing them under one node or one hierarchy. In order to create a group, we would use the shortcut key Control-G, or you can go to Edit, Group. To do that, we need to select multiple objects to place in our group. I'll select the sphere, then hold my Shift key, select the cube. If I had more objects, I could continue holding Shift and click on those objects. Once you have all those objects selected that you want in the group, you hit Control and G. So Control G will make your new group. If you look in the outliner, you'll see we now have Group 1. If we look here in the general box, we can see Group 1, because that's the current thing we have selected, is the group. If we look under the group, by clicking the little plus sign, we can see the sphere and the cube are both under the group. Once again, select Group 1. If we hit W for the Move tool, we can see Group 1 is located at 0, 0, 0. Remember, whenever Maya makes an object for the first time, with your interactive creation not checked, it will create that object at 0, 0, 0. In this case, we're creating a group, so the default gets created at 0, 0, 0. This group now controls both the sphere and the circle. So we can move them, we can rotate them, we can scale them, and we'll notice that when we did that, we would have different values for each of the positions. You'll notice that our pivot point for the group is located at 0, 0, 0 because the group is just a point in space. It's just one point in space within Maya. It doesn't have any other type of physical property. It has position, scale, and rotate. If I want to center the group or center the pivot between the two objects or between the multiple objects, we just go up to Modify and down to Center Pivot. And now you can see that the group has moved its pivot point to the center of both the sphere and the cube. We could also have used our shortcut button if we created one. Another way to create a group is without anything selected at all, you could just click on Control and G, or you can go to your Edit, Group. When you do that, it will create what's called a null. A null is just an empty group. You can see here we have null 1. So now we just have an empty group. It is actually nothing. So if we don't have anything selected, it's very difficult to select a group in our Maya space because you can't see the group. So one way to select it would be using your outliner or your hierarchy, where you could see your group or your null. And a different way is if you know that you have objects in a group, you could select one of the objects in the group, hit your up arrow, so your up arrow key, so that you go up or down with the down arrow your group. So you're jumping up the hierarchy, like so. So this is just another way to make sure that everything in your group can be moved, rotate, positioned, scaled together, and scaled proportionally or from a particular point. So the other thing we want to look at is our layers. So over here we have display layers. All you have to do to make a layer is select an object, and if you go over to these little icons, you have create a new layer and assign the selected object to that layer. You can create a new layer that would just be an empty layer, and then you can move the selection down in a list. So you can move that particular object down into a different layer or down within the layer list. So with my cube selected, I'll just click on this little icon here. That's the create new layer and assign the object to it, so the one with the little sphere. And it will create a layer. It's called layer 1. You can double click that and rename it. So you can call it cube, and I usually do _lyr for layer, because remember it's going to create a node within Maya that's going to refer to the actual layer. So I use _lyr so I know that it's a layer when I look at the node if I ever need to do that. And you can assign it a color if you want, and click save. So now my cube is on this layer. The V is for visibility, so I can click the V to view my cube or not view my cube. So we have V for visibility. We have our T, so if we click this empty box all the way over to the right, we have T, which is templated, so that will not allow you to select it, but it will allow you to see kind of a templated wireframe view of that object, or objects, whatever objects you have. You can have multiple objects in a layer. We have R, which is reference, so again we can't select it, but it is visible. And if we go into floor mode, R would show up as black. And if we wanted to add the sphere to this layer, we would just select the sphere. We could come over to the layer, right click and say add selected object, and that would add that object to the layer. If they're parented, if this sphere is parented to this cube, it will take the sphere with it onto the layer. Currently it's not parented, so it is not taking the cube. We had to add it separately. We can still select it using the outliner, but you can't select it within the viewport. Okay. So that's good if you're just trying to look at something as a reference, or you have multiple objects in the scene and you're trying to line them up and you don't want to mess up any you don't want to mess up a particular object you have. But so with this sphere selected, I could just create a new layer, and now it's here instead of on this one. Right? And don't forget, we just double click to rename our layers. That concludes this video. Thank you for watching.